The distance. Sarah stared at the empty chair across from her at the dinner table. Ryan had called again to say he would be late at the office. This was the third time this week. The children had already eaten and gone upstairs to do their homework, and she sat alone with a plate of cooling food that she had spent the afternoon preparing. The kitchen felt too big and too quiet, despite the sounds of life happening somewhere else in the house. She picked up her phone and scrolled through old photos. There was one from 5 years ago when Ryan had surprised her with a weekend getaway to the coast. He had written her a note that morning telling her to pack a bag and meet him at the car. She remembered how alive she had felt then, how present he had been. How had they gotten here, to this place where he barely looked at her anymore? The doorbell rang, and Sarah jumped slightly. She walked to the front door and opened it to find Megan standing there with a nervous smile. Megan was a local college student who had answered their babysitting advertisement just 2 weeks earlier. She was bright and eager, always punctual, and the children adored her immediately. Sarah had felt an instant sense of relief knowing she had found someone trustworthy to help with the kids while she managed the household in her own slowly fading sense of purpose. Sarah invited Megan inside and thanked her for coming on such short notice. She had plans to meet her friend Jennifer at the spa, and she desperately needed the break. The stress of her marriage had been manifesting in tension headaches and sleepless nights. Megan assured her that everything would be fine and that she should relax and enjoy herself. Sarah felt a flicker of guilt leaving her children, but a stronger pull toward escape. As Sarah grabbed her purse and keys, she noticed a light on in Ryan's home office. He had texted 20 minutes earlier saying he was still at work, but apparently he had snuck home without telling her. She stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the faint sounds coming from behind his closed door. She considered knocking, asking him where things had gone wrong between them. Instead, she turned away and headed out the door. In the car on the way to the spa, Sarah made a decision. She could not keep living like this, like a ghost in her own marriage. Something had to change. When she returned home that evening, she would have a real conversation with Ryan about what was happening between them. She would demand honesty and presence and effort. She would tell him that their marriage was slipping away and that she was not willing to let it disappear without a fight. What Sarah did not know was that while she was gone, Ryan had started noticing Megan in ways that went beyond gratitude for her help with the children. What Sarah did not know was that the cracks in their marriage were about to splinter into something far more complicated and devastating. The evening that seemed like a simple babysitting arrangement would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would test every promise they had ever made to each other.
The temptation. Ryan sat in his home office, pretending to work, but his mind kept drifting downstairs, where Megan was with the children. He told himself it was nothing, just a passing distraction brought on by stress and exhaustion. His marriage had become hollow. He and Sarah communicating only about logistics and bills. He could not remember the last time she had looked at him with desire or genuine interest in who he was as a person. He heard Megan laughing with the kids downstairs, a bright, infectious sound that seemed to fill the entire house. She had such an easy way with them, making even bedtime stories feel like grand adventures. She was young, yes, but more than that, she was present. She was engaged. She made everything feel alive. He closed his laptop and decided to head downstairs, telling himself he just wanted to check on the children. When Ryan entered the living room, Megan was sitting on the floor, building a fort out of cushions and blankets with his daughter Emma. His son Marcus was already inside the fort, making animal sounds. Megan looked up and smiled at him, that innocent, genuine smile that seemed to light up her entire face. She was wearing a simple sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a casual ponytail, and somehow she looked more beautiful to him in that moment than anyone ever had. Ryan suggested that it was getting late and that the children should get ready for bed. Megan immediately began the process of putting away toys and guiding the kids upstairs. Ryan followed, offering to help tuck them in. As they worked together in the hallway, their hands brushed when passing a blanket, and Ryan felt a jolt of electricity run through him. He pulled his hand away quickly, but not before noticing the slight blush that had crept into Megan's cheeks. After the children were asleep, Ryan came back downstairs. Megan was on the couch flipping through a magazine, clearly waiting to be paid before heading home. Ryan poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat in the chair across from her. They made small talk about how the children had behaved, what they had eaten, whether they had any behavioral issues. Their conversation was normal, innocent, but underneath it, Ryan felt a current of something unspoken, something dangerous. He found himself asking Megan personal questions about her life, her college courses, her dreams. She answered openly and honestly, talking about wanting to make a difference in the world, about feeling lost sometimes, about the pressure of knowing what her future should look like. As she spoke, Ryan saw not just her physical beauty, but her vulnerability, her searching spirit. He saw in her a version of Sarah from years ago, before marriage and children and responsibility had hardened her into someone he barely recognized. When it came time for Megan to leave, Ryan walked her to the door. He told her how much the family appreciated her, how rare it was to find someone so trustworthy and kind. He let his hand linger on her shoulder for just a moment longer than necessary. Megan looked up at him, her eyes uncertain and searching. For a second, Ryan thought about pulling away, about putting distance between them, about doing the right thing. Instead, he said goodnight and watched as she walked out to her car. But as he closed the door behind her, Ryan knew that something fundamental had shifted. He had opened a door that he could not close. And the question was no longer whether he would act on his feelings, but when.
The affair. The revelation. Sarah hired a private investigator. She told herself it was just to confirm her suspicions, to put her paranoia to rest. Deep down, she knew the truth already, but she needed proof, something concrete that would force everyone to stop pretending. For 2 weeks, she watched the investigator follow Ryan and Megan as they met in a hotel near the airport. She watched the photographs and the evidence mount up with a growing sense of betrayal and heartbreak that was almost physical in its intensity. When she finally had all the proof she needed, Sarah called an emergency meeting with her lawyer. She filed papers for separation and moved money into an account in her own name. She prepared herself mentally for the conversation she knew she had to have. Part of her wanted to confront Ryan and Megan together, to watch their faces when they realized that they had been caught. But she knew that was coming from a place of pain, and she wanted to handle this with dignity, even though her entire world was crumbling. One evening, after the children were asleep, Sarah called Ryan into the living room. She laid out the photographs from the investigator, spread across the coffee table, like evidence of a crime. Ryan went pale, his mouth opening and closing as if he wanted to speak but could not find the words. Sarah did not raise her voice, she did not cry, she simply stated the facts of what she had discovered and told him that she wanted him out of the house by the end of the week. Ryan tried to explain, tried to justify, tried to ask for forgiveness. He told Sarah that he had been unhappy, that she had been distant, that the marriage had been over long before anything physical happened with Megan. Sarah listened to every word and felt nothing but a cold, empty space where her love for him used to be. She told him that she did not care about his reasons, that he had made his choice and now he had to live with the consequences. The next morning, Sarah called Megan and fired her over the phone. Megan tried to apologize, tried to explain, but Sarah hung up before she could finish speaking. She could not bear to hear Megan's voice, could not stand to look at the girl who had betrayed her trust. Later that day, Megan sent several texts and left voicemails, but Sarah deleted them all without reading or listening to them. The young woman who had seemed so trustworthy, so innocent, had turned out to be just like everyone else, selfish, and willing to destroy others for a moment of pleasure. Sarah told the children that Daddy would be staying somewhere else for a while, that it was not their fault, and that both parents loved them very much. Marcus seemed to understand on some level that something serious had happened, but Emma kept asking when Daddy was coming home. Sarah did not have an answer for her. She did not know what came next, or who she would become after this, or whether she would ever trust anyone again. Ryan moved into an apartment across town. Megan stopped going to college and took a job at a retail store far away from the neighborhood where she had caused so much damage. And Sarah began the long, painful process of rebuilding her life, knowing that nothing would ever be the way it was before.
The aftermath. 6 months had passed since the separation, and Sarah sat in a therapist's office trying to understand how she had missed the signs, how she had let her marriage deteriorate to the point where her husband could betray her with someone she had welcomed into their home. Her therapist, Dr. Mitchell, asked her to consider what role she had played in creating distance between herself and Ryan, not to excuse his behavior, but to understand where the cracks had started forming. Sarah began to see things more clearly. She had been so focused on being the perfect mother, the perfect wife, the perfect hostess, that she had lost herself entirely. She had stopped pursuing her own interests, stopped demanding attention and presence from her husband. She had accepted his emotional distance as normal, had excused his absence as the demands of work. She had created an environment where it was easier for him to turn away from her than to turn toward her. And eventually, he had. Sarah decided to go back to school, to pursue a degree in counseling. She wanted to help other women navigate the complexities of marriage and identity and loss. She started exercising again, something she had not done in years. She reconnected with old friends who had drifted away as her marriage had consumed all her emotional energy. Slowly, she began to feel like herself again. Not the self she had been before, but a newer, stronger version of who she could become. Ryan tried to co-parent with Sarah as respectfully as possible. He attended therapy, trying to understand his own patterns and motivations. He admitted to himself that his unhappiness in the marriage had been real, but that running toward Megan had been the wrong solution. He should have fought for his marriage, should have suggested counseling, should have been honest about his feelings, instead of sneaking around and building a web of lies. Megan struggled the most of all with what had happened. She had ruined a family, torn apart a marriage, and hurt a woman who had been nothing but kind to her. She carried the guilt of it with her every day. She eventually reached out to Sarah, not expecting forgiveness, but needing to apologize, needing Sarah to know that she understood the gravity of what she had done. Sarah did not respond to the letter, but she read it and filed it away. And slowly, over time, the anger began to soften into something more like sadness. A year after the separation, Sarah and Ryan finalized their divorce. It was amicable, as divorces could be, given the circumstances. They agreed on custody and visitation and support. They agreed to try to maintain civility for the sake of their children. Ryan eventually met someone else, a woman closer to his age who had her own children, and they seemed genuinely happy together. Sarah felt a twinge of sadness when she saw them together, but also relief that Ryan seemed to have found what he was looking for. Sarah realized that the marriage had not failed because of Megan, or even because of Ryan alone. It had failed because both she and Ryan had stopped showing up for each other, had stopped choosing each other every single day. They had let resentment and distance and unmet needs build up until there was nothing left but shells, going through the motions of a life together. Sarah stood in her new apartment that she had decorated with colors and art that made her happy, and felt a sense of peace. The pain of betrayal had not gone away entirely, but it had transformed into something she could carry without it crushing her. She had learned that love was not always enough, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do for another person was to let them go. And she had learned that she was stronger than she had ever believed possible, that she could survive heartbreak and rebuild her life and even find joy again. The story of Sarah and Ryan was not a fairy tale. It was a tragedy, but it was also a lesson in what happens when people stop fighting for what matters, when they let temptation and weakness override commitment, and when they forget that love requires daily choices, daily presence, daily effort. It was a story about how easily a marriage could crumble, and how difficult, but not impossible, it could be to build a life after that crumbling. And it was a story about resilience, about the human capacity to survive loss and emerge transformed on the other side.